Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to ISAT. This is the next in the series of webinars from ISAT. I'm Duncan Stonehouse. I'm the head of school at Bangkok Prep, and I am also the co-chair of professional development in ISAT. We previously have used Zoom for our webinars, but we did experience some technical difficulties with Zoom recently. So today, you'll be delighted to hear that you are the first group taking part in this webinar with ISAT using Microsoft Teams. So welcome. We would appreciate your feedback with regards to the technology side of it and the quality side of it. I'm delighted to say that the webinars have been very well attended, and one of the rationales initially was to provide high quality professional development free of charge to ISAT teachers and members of staff in all the provinces around Thailand, without you having to get in a car or a bus or a plane and fly to Bangkok and attend a hotel somewhere. So many reasons: reduces carbon footprint, allows smaller schools to access high quality CPD without you leaving the confines of your settee and sofa or your classroom. So we're delighted to offer this to you. Obviously, it's another aspect that we can offer high quality CPD during the pandemic, when we should be reducing our social distancing as well. So there's twofold that we believe these webinars are successful, and thank you so much for everybody attending these. I'd like to hand over to Emma Marie Horridge. Emma is already a senior school leadership, part of the senior school leadership team at Brighton College, and she has already led some early years webinars. Her experience is fabulous, and some of the ideas that she's about to share, I'm sure you will find, are innovative, creative, and very useful. Hopefully that you and your colleagues can bring them directly into the classroom and benefit the younger children that learn within our schools. So, hello Emma, can you hear me? Are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go. Nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. I tried to give a little message before. I think it was when it was a little bit noisy from some of the feedback. So just to reiterate, before I start, if there's anybody here who has not registered with their name that they would like to have as an attendee, then please, in the comments box, write your full name and school so that ISAT can ensure you have your certificates. And also, I can't see the chat box when I'm presenting. So if you have any questions, it's really helpful if you can add them nearer the end so that we can then have a quick look and answer any questions. So I will start presenting now. I'm not quite sure that assessment in early years is quite as exciting as previous webinars. It's something that we obviously have to think about. I'm just trying to press the timer on my phone so that I don't run over for you. It's something we do have to think about and do in ways that can be really helpful for us as early years professionals. But it's a little bit dry at times, so I will try and make it as interesting as possible. Okay, so that's what we're looking at today. We are looking at assessment in the EYFS. Many of you will be working with the British curriculum, so this will apply directly to you. For those of you who are maybe not, there will be some parts that I apologise for because it's quite specific to the early years foundation stage. But I also hope there are lots that you can take and transfer to a different curricula if you are using an alternative. Roughly the order of going through things today, I want to talk a little bit about a term, datification. I think it's really useful for us to think about as early years teachers and how we look at assessment and to reflect on our own practice. I have split up how I talk a little bit today about our assessment for learning side of assessment, and then our summative assessments. I have looked briefly at the new updated frameworks and the summative assessments, so I'll try and talk and link to that part there. One of the biggest issues we have at Brighton, and I'm sure will be the same for lots of people here, is how to tackle assessment, particularly when you have a high cohort of EAL pupils. So I'm going to come on to do that. And very briefly at the end, couldn't currently talk about assessment without mentioning the current situation we're in with COVID-19. So datification was a term that I read, I think it was in the nursery magazine that comes out a few years ago, and particularly enjoyed it. I just thought it was a nice term. It's from Bradbury and Robert Holmes. And it's this sort of obsession that we have with creating data from our youngest children. And particularly as I moved into more senior leadership roles, I'm that person that's driving that need for that data from some of the staff. And I think it's something we have to be really conscious of, because children aren't just numbers, but at the same time, we're constantly asking for those terms of numbers. That's particularly had an issue in the last few years with the EYFS baselines. Now, even though we're not in the UK, I think it's really important, if you're ever looking at EYFS assessment, to really understand the new EYFS baseline, either from the point of view of why it's not a good thing, but also where it's coming from. So from a government perspective, they really want to have some data at the start of schooling so that they can see, you know, how schools are progressing. It's not designed to be about an individual child, it's more about a cohort of children and seeing how there's progress there. I attended an early years excellence workshop a few years ago, and when this was first coming about, lots of different people were kind of putting in ideas of what this baseline could look like, and lots of the highest regarded early years specialists were looking at that teacher-led assessment that we believe in, but the government really wanted something that was valid, facts and figures. And they struggled to get people who were on board with this, but eventually they've come up with their system, which is very much kind of like an iPad game that's supposed to be appealing to children to create this valid assessment. However, this sort of assessment, this sort of testing with young children to create the data that people are comfortable with really isn't valid. And I think we have to have an understanding of this, because as the baseline progresses, it may be something that more schools want from us internationally. They want a more test-like situation with your data, and you need to be able to understand why that test isn't an accurate baseline. So the main thing is the interpretations, okay? These sorts of tests, and I'm sure we'll get more that will try and be targeted at selling to us. They come on an iPad, it's friendly for children, you know, select the number, for example. But here is a great example that I saw of one that completely fails. So we have a picture of a ladybird, and one of the questions was along the lines of, how many spots are on the ladybird? Now, for one child, they may count 5. Another child may count 7. Another child may count 9, and another child may refuse, even though they know. So what happens is that when we're doing these types of tests to get a valid result, our youngest children don't respond in the way that we expect. That formal one-to-one assessment, it still really depends on the child's willingness to engage, the relationship they have with that adult, and therefore the reliability isn't necessarily there. So we have to have that understanding of this to know that when we're talking about assessment in early years, we have to really fight as much as possible against this type of test baseline, because this doesn't tell us what we need to know. If any of you attended the webinar that I did on play, another reason is also because we don't want to reduce our children to who can recognise a square, who can recognise a triangle. We want to assess them based on their bigger understanding, their understanding of problem solving, their understanding of how to work in groups, things that actually can't be ticked off in a baseline. So it's that understanding of what it is that we want to achieve. And from there, I think we can really grow confident in the fact that what we were doing before and what we hopefully are doing now is an accurate assessment. It meets the needs of the children. There was a lovely quote here from the same article I mentioned before, and it spoke about the changeability of children. And that's why when we're talking about assessments today, everything I'm going to talk about comes back to teacher-based observation. There's no need for tick sheets or tests. It's teacher-based observations, because one child who may refuse to count bears on the iPad, the next day when they're playing, may count them. And if we have any kind of fixed test, it doesn't actually help us understand the children. It doesn't help us move them forward. It doesn't help us understand how good the teacher is, because it doesn't give us an accurate result of what the children are particularly doing. So it's really important that with any of our assessment that we do as early years, it's an unfixed position. It's constantly changing and evolving depending on the needs of the child at that time. Another quote that I found that I thought really went back to that joy of how assessment can be such an important part of play-based learning is from Susan Isaacs, all the way back in 1954, which also shows us how we go round and round in circles. And it's, if we watch him when he is free to play as he will, the child shows us all he is wishing and feeling and all that he is pondering. And I think that's a real thing for us to think about. You know, we want to be observing and understand what their potential is, what it is they're trying to achieve, how we can help them achieve that, rather than can you count this, that, or the other. Now, I mentioned I'm going to talk a little bit about the new framework for those of you who are following EYFS, but I think it's also really important in our aims to be innovative and think about something new. The 2012 document for the Development Matters framework is a really good document, particularly if anybody is new to the EYFS. I've spoken to lots of teachers in the past who have previously been year 1, year 2 teachers. They want to come down and work in EYFS. They have these amazing relationships with the children. They're obviously good teachers, but they really want to hone how to observe early years children. And I think coming back to this document and these diagrams and things that were put together is a really good starting place for new teachers, teachers who are changing where they're learning in their profession, or maybe come from a different framework and are moving in, just to really refresh you of what it is that we're doing when we assess in early years. And it comes back to that play-based learning in the moment planning. So in the middle, we have the child.
Just while people maybe are thinking of questions, I'd like to thank you on behalf of ISAT for your insight and the thought of moving away from fixed assessment into more teacher-based observations and identifying and making the most of teachable moments is really insightful and very helpful to all of us. So thank you. Whether people have already are on similar path or maybe they're reconsidering the teaching that occurs with the younger children. So, do you see the key person? Do you use the key person in your school?
Yes, we do, in the way that I think many international schools, we actually have classroom teachers who are fully qualified teachers within their small group, and then they have the TLAs, and then within the year group they're all working together with all the children, because we have shared areas, which I know from visiting other schools, lots of schools have a very similar setup. The slight difference with our key persons is that all of our key persons are the qualified teacher. So when I was in the UK, if you were in a nursery, your key person may be one of the teaching and learning assistants. We don't have that. It's always the classroom teacher, but we work in the same way of the children playing and interacting and mixing, and all of them working together. One of the really good systems there that we do try and maintain with the more UK style of key persons is actually it being okay to observe someone else's child and feed back to the key person, which would be the classroom teacher, because often the children, when they're having an interaction, they're with a different group of children from different classes. So that is where the online assessment tools are really helpful, because you can have observations that are shared from other teachers. So if I'm down working with children, it doesn't matter that I'm not the key person, I can still share that information. It goes direct to their learning journey. It feeds back to their key person, who is the one who is ultimately responsible for all that information. And so it's all, but the slight difference is that it's always a qualified classroom teacher, because we don't have that higher level of nursery nurse, TLA, etc., that we would have in the UK.
In the play-based learning webinar, you mentioned helicopter stories. It's a great way to use assessment. Are there any other methods you can suggest?
The helicopter stories are a really good way of you writing down and recording the things that are being said. Another way that you can obviously do some of these things, we spoke about the floor books. They're really useful because you can do things with the children at the time. So if the children are interested in something, we print the picture of what they've been doing, we can record it in the floor book and talk about what it is that we're doing, and they might actually write in the book at the time. One of the things that I didn't like years ago when I was in early years was when each child had their own like exercise books, which was kind of a push down method. And then you would have this feeling that you need to fill up an exercise book for each child. And, you go back to that tradition of come over here and start writing in it. The benefit of a floor book is you get the advantage of exercise books where you've got a central place of recording where a child might write something or do something, or you have squiggly notes. But it's a shared thing for all children. So you can just quickly annotate the name, the time, and you've got it in a central place. But it's not that you don't have to say, child, you must write now. You can allow it to happen naturally as part of what they're interested in. And what we always found was the more the children do that writing, or maybe you add their picture and add it in, and you add some notes of things in that floor book, the more children are interested in being a part of it. And that's then a really useful assessment tool to look back at and see what's happened. Something else that we use a lot, which the teachers are really good at, is speech bubbles live onto displays. So we have, just a little speech bubble of something the child said. So the children all have their own picture, and then the speech bubble would just be written in, it's added up, and they change as and when they say something of interest. So it's a movable wall. Another one I've had before is just a piece of string for a writing wall, and by writing it starts as mark making, and every child has a peg, and anything that they happen to mark make or write or do, it just gets added to the peg. And again, it's just a really useful visual tool. You can see what they're doing, where they're at, the children want to have something hanging from their peg, and you can see it very visually, and then they can take it home, once you've had the opportunity to do that. So there are a couple of tools that I found particularly useful.
Emma, on behalf of everybody that's attended this afternoon and participated, I'd like to give you a huge thank you for your insightful work that you've been sharing with us on assessment. And I think a blend of these webinars and some actual in-person meetings in different groups and clusters would be definitely the way forward. It's a very cheap and probably the most effective way of CPD that we can have. So thank you everybody for attending and participating this afternoon. And maybe we'll give a virtual round of applause to Emma. So, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.